So good day, everyone, and welcome to our lunchtime discussion, European Green Deal 2.0 and the future of it. I think I feel like you, because of course we in Martin Center, we like to think that we organize very interesting meetings, but specifically this topic, I think is on the focus. I think the full room kind of shows that, and I would claim it will be the topic of one element of the many discussions in the upcoming 5 years. So future of the Green Deal. So let's go, now we are after European Parliament elections, regrouping, discussions are starting, we are waiting for hearing. But as we speak about Green Deal, let's go back from where it began. So we remember 2019 European Parliament elections, just after Brexit. Climate change was the big topic. Greta Thunberg was the voice of the generation. And one could claim that as part of that context, Green Deal then became a key project for the European Commission. The EPP, among some other groups, were not totally convinced from the concept as it was. The topic, yes, but maybe the basic plan from the beginning. But then, 2-3 months later, COVID came and changed totally the dynamics. And of course, then 2 years later, the war in Ukraine. And so there were a couple big, now after 5 years, we can consider there has been many, well, the trouble and the challenge is always in details, but you could claim at least 3 big challenges. First of all, the Green Deal, the concept, we have found out it's much, much more expensive than we never thought, number one. Number two, the funding. Obviously, there was expectations and hope that the public sector would just rush in and be very, part of that, basically finance that. Well, that we have not seen. And thirdly, because of COVID and war in Ukraine, the European economic landscape has totally changed. And what we see from the voter, that yes, and also polling, yes, people are concerned about climate change, and yes, they want action. But no, they are not ready to sacrifice their well-being because of, so that comes first. And so there's, one aspect of that, which no doubt we will discuss, for example, energy prices. The fact is, in Europe, 20-30% of the households live salary by salary. So if you add up, double your electricity bill, that has immediate impact. And so part of that we did see in the result of the European Parliament elections. Other aspects is the whole impact of this, the European efforts for CO2 emissions. For example, just to mention one detail, some time ago, European Court of Auditors were underlining that, for example, the whole 100 billion which we gave to agriculture, what was the impact? So that's part of the discussion. We should make policies which have an impact. And secondly, the global landscape. Some weeks ago, there was a big report on the global energy consumption. And as we can see, basically not much has changed. If you look at the global consumption and use of fossil fuels, that continues the same. One reason being that the European Union is a small part of that energy consumption. And then we have big players like China, which basically is playing with the strategy. Yes, we invest on renewable energies and the technological change, but at the same time we make sure that we have energy, and so the CO2 emissions globally are not going down. But it's not also so negative in the sense that there are in Europe countries and industry sectors which have taken the challenge with the feeling that even with the quite challenging concept, the Commission promoted that yes, we can do it. Yes, and they have made transformations. So what they want now is the continuity, because there's a feeling that it is feasible. And of course, the second, climate change is there. And so action is needed. So this is the future. So to wrap it up, the challenge is indeed how to now move on, because the Green Deal is there and it's part of the agenda, but how to connect that with competitiveness and how to make it economically viable. So with this, I open the discussion. Welcome you all. I think it's going to be interesting discussion. As the sidelines on your chair, a better deal for climate and European competitiveness. So that was kind of the warming up for discussion, and we continue now that discussion led by Dimitar Lilkov, who is our moderator and also will call the panel and will introduce the speakers. So welcome and looking forward with you the discussion.
Thank you, Tomi. Thank you all friends and colleagues for joining us. My name is Dimitar Lilkov. I'll have the honor to moderate this session. A better bargain. Why do we need a better bargain? Why do we need a better deal? I think there's consensus brewing in Brussels about the need to improve the European Green Deal. Not abolish it, improve it. With the Martin Center, we've been thinking about these issues, as Tomi referenced our recent report where we tried to see the major shortcomings of the Green Deal and maybe the best ways to fix it. I'm not going to go into technical details about the practicalities. We have an amazing panel set up here today, and these people have more to say when it comes to policy recommendations. But maybe I'll say a word or two about the philosophy behind the Green Deal and why this philosophy brought some negative outcomes, and maybe to stir things up a bit. Let's be honest, parts of the European Green Deal, parts of it, went against basic economic principles. They went against market logic. In the last mandate, as if there was a political push in Brussels to bring forward a revolution, to shake up our economy. As if certain political forces tried to deconstruct our economy and society and to place decarbonization and climate at the core. And it's a way of thinking which forgot about economic growth. It's a way of thinking which forgot about competitiveness, or maybe took it for granted. Because most of the policy prescriptions we saw were about more and more public spending and more centralization of power and centralized management as the best solution forward. And most importantly, I think some of the main architects of the European Green Deal simply forgot about the interests of European businesses and citizens. And I've met with those people. You all have. Many of them come from the political circles of the progressives, the Greens. These are the kinds of people who tell you that you have 1 million green jobs just around the corner, that we need to reevaluate our economic growth model. Maybe we need to make room for the developing world. Europe needs to take a step back. And most importantly and worryingly, I think, these type of people will be happy to see if the European economy shrinks. If we use less energy, consume less, produce less, and if we have a smaller footprint, this would be great. As if Europe were to be poorer, this would be a good thing because we'll have a smaller carbon footprint. And we see the results today. We were aiming for decarbonization, but we're seeing more and more deindustrialization in Europe. It was supposed to be a deal, but many European companies are not making a buck out of it. And in the end, what you see is actually a huge wealth transfer from Europe to the People's Republic of China. Money away from Europe in the hands of one of our main global competitors. I'll stop here. It's a new mandate. It's a new political reality, which gives me hope. And don't take me wrong. We need to pursue decarbonization in the EU, but we need new sound policies and maybe a healthy dose of realism. So with that being said, today we have one of the leading voices in Brussels when it comes to these topics, Dr. Peter Liese, who is a long-standing member of the European Parliament, one of our leading politicians when it comes to decarbonization and climate change, Ms. Mettler, Vice President Europe for Breakthrough Energy, also extremely outspoken when it comes to innovation and competitiveness. Ms. Lídia Pereira, who also joined us shortly, she's on her way, re-elected MEP and President of the Youth of the EPP. I think we'll start with Dr. Liese. Please, Peter, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for your invitation and the kind introduction. Thank you for your interest in this really hot topic. It is of crucial importance for the EPP family and I guess for most of the Europeans. I spoke to our chair, EPP chair Manfred Weber, yesterday night, and he clearly said, we experienced a few weeks ago the biggest floods in Central Europe ever. I see András Kulja from Hungary. He can tell us what happened in Hungary and the neighboring countries. At the same time, Lídia will explain in Portugal there was the biggest forest fire ever. And Manfred clearly said these are two events that should remind us that climate change is an issue. And we cannot go and just ignore it and scrap the whole Green Deal. And I think we need to take it very serious. Also, when I speak to industry, I don't hear many voices from industry. I hear more voices from politicians than from industry that say, let's revert the Green Deal. Industry says, we are on our way. There are issues and there are problems. So Timmermans did it wrong, but please don't revert the Green Deal. We put our money in electric vehicles, in decarbonization technology. So we don't want stranded investments here. And that's why we have to take it serious and see what is good and that should be defended and what is bad that should be changed. And we have a strong challenge ahead of us already now. Some car manufacturers struggle with the 25 target for CO2 cars. Not all struggle. Some did the right decisions. And for me, it's very important to point out this was not a Timmermans target. It was put on the table by, and Mettler knows it, Miguel Arias Cañete, EPP commissioner from Spain, and we defended it against the Greens that wanted higher targets. And it's possible. And industry, when you really talk to them, when you not only read the headlines, but when you ask them what you really want, they say enabling conditions. We need charging infrastructure, we need incentives, we need reduction of electricity prices so that they can sell these cars. And that is what we need to do. On the other hand, we need to change things. And I would like to speak about 3 points that we have to change. The first one is the ban of the combustion engine. That was not an EPP target. 35 target for cars was a Timmermans target. We opposed and we lost. Now we have other majorities. So let's go for technological neutrality. I'm fully convinced that the electric vehicle is the car of the future. And most of the companies put their investments there. But 100%, to decide today that in 35 we have 100% electric vehicles and maybe a bit of hydrogen, but no combustion engine, even if they go with carbon neutral fuels, I think that's going too far and we need to change it. We need to be more technologically open. The second point, it's a topic of these hours. I can't say if it is in 1 hour or in 24 hours, but I think we will see a very important step on deforestation. That was a typical Timmermans file. It was rushed through the parliament and to the council. We didn't have really time to discuss it, and now we see implementation is much more difficult than it was seen. Not only forest owners, but also SMEs are complaining. Third countries that want to stop deforestation, and that's our target. We want to stop deforestation, but third countries in Africa tell us our farmers cannot do this. We don't have the technology. We need more guidance. We need more help for implementation. So a postponement, better guidance, infrastructure, so for the technology, IT infrastructure is desperately needed. Otherwise, it would do more good than more wrong than good. And I hope we will see something very soon. It would be a big EPP victory after the election, and people can see that things are changing. We just don't go blindly and say it has been decided, we need to do it. we need to look at it again and take people along. That's very important. Last but not least, maybe even the most important, we need to work much more with people, with economy, with industry, with SMEs, with the farmers. So Timmermans was imposing things, and we need to have more dialogue. And that's why it's so important that the structural dialogue has been established in agriculture, but also tomorrow we are discussing in the Environment Committee the dialogue with industry. What is needed to make the transition happen in Europe? And that's much more than to have a target and a punishment if you don't reach the target. It's much more. Permitting is important. Speed up permitting. Abolish all the bureaucracy that stands in the way of the transition. Make it easier. And that's why this dialogue is so important. I have a good contact to the German steel industry. One of the CEOs that brings all the steel to VW, they want to decarbonize, but they say we have more than 50 permits from 50 different authorities before we can start to decarbonize our steel plant. So if we continue like this, it will never happen, and then we will have deindustrialization of Europe and not decarbonization of European industry. So let's make it easier, and let's take people along. We need also to think about the working poor. We have a lot of social system in most of the European countries. People that are unemployed get support, but people that wake up every morning early and go to their workplace and they need a car, they cannot afford a new electric vehicle. We need to support them. There are good ideas, for example, support the leasing for people that need their car to go to work. And it can be designed in the way that it's not to the benefit of China, but also for the European car producers. So let's take people along. Let's do the targeted support for those in need, and let's support those that want to do the decarbonization and not have so many obstacles in their way. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne, what is your assessment?
I actually first want to go back 5 years, because I was, of course, back then at the Commission, and I was part of the team that actually started working towards the Green Deal. I thought at the time it was an excellent idea. However, what I always told the colleagues back then is this is the biggest transformation we will ever live through. I said, I think we should talk about it like it's a structural reform. Instead, we got what you said. It's going to create millions of jobs. It's going to be wonderful. We never talked about the trade-offs. And I said, I really don't think this is the way to talk about it. Let's say it's a structural reform. That way people will know this is going to require something of me, right? There was obviously no consensus around this when the green, and some of you may know this, I used to work in digital tech. And I gave up after 20 years, and I said, clean tech is where Europe's going to be leading. And I really believed this 5 years ago, that this was a huge opportunity for Europe to ride essentially the technology frontier, to be building these technologies. It would play to Europe's strength, to our expertise in deep tech, engineering. It's technology with a purpose. I thought we're going to be leading here. And I have to say, it's sort of a little bit disillusioning now 5 years later where we are. So I just thought, before I look forward, I wanted to look back. And I think one of the big mistakes, maybe also that were made, is to sell the Green Deal as the new growth agenda. Because then naturally that became a disappointment when we saw it wasn't a growth agenda. I will also say, I think one of the mistakes that was made is, even though we called it a sort of a growth agenda, to my knowledge, DG ECFIN or so, they were not really involved in any of this, right? So, if we're really saying that we want an all-of-government approach, you really needed to have all the departments on board and really work towards the same direction. We then, in my opinion, in 2022, needed to pivot. We needed to understand, essentially, that Europe henceforth, and this was after the war began and after... Hi, Lydia. and after the massive energy crisis, that Europe henceforth was going to be a resource-poor geography, right? I mean, we don't have fossil energy. In clean technologies, we're largely dependent on China. So, you know, if you think of it, energy is prosperity, and no country, no geography has ever prospered in the absence of energy, access to affordable and abundant energy. And so this was a really big change. I know we pride ourselves that we got through the winter and it wasn't as bad as we thought, but it was really a fundamental shift. And what we have seen since 2022 is an acceleration in the deindustrialization in Europe. I mean, really massive deindustrialization. I would argue that a lot of our automotive sector is now really in a very perilous state. You see that Volkswagen is speaking for the first time ever about closures. We saw what happened here with Audi. Mercedes had a profit warning. So this is serious, right? Because we don't have that many prospering industries in Europe. So this is really something to pay attention to. Then Northvolt. Northvolt was always, you know, sort of the flagship for our for industrial policy, clean tech. I mean, we lined up back in the day when I was still at the Commission. We lined up the offtake. So we had demand, we had money, we had political momentum. And yet we still, now this company that had so much promise to turn us into a leader in batteries is laying off workers and is having really significant problems. Maybe also just to mention that we are in the process of losing the chemical industry, I think. Ludwigshafen, there's rumors that BASF will shut down about 1/7 of the production facilities in Ludwigshafen between now and 2026 or 2028. Either way, it's not growing, it's shrinking. You saw yesterday Covestro sold to ADNOC. So we're at a tipping point. This is what I'm saying is sort of the bad news are now accumulating. So we need to take this very seriously. And I think what underpins this, and I say it also as someone who really talks to a lot of international investors, is there is now really significant doubt that in Europe you can still produce and manufacture at scale, I emphasize at scale, at competitive prices, and with the digital performance that the world has come to expect. There's significant doubts that this is still possible in Europe. And that's why I think this is sort of, I like to call it a scale or fail moment for Europe, a scale or fail. So, and some of you may know this, but I've been working on competitiveness for more than 20 years. And this is about as serious of a situation as I have ever seen. So, and the Draghi report, I think, came at an excellent time. I personally like it, but his main conclusions are sort of we need to raise productivity and we need integration of the single market. These are really long-term, difficult projects, right? It's not like we haven't tried to integrate the single market. I mean, how often have we said pledge to complete the single market in digital or in energy? So these are really long-term projects. So I thought I'd share a little bit what I think should be done in short term. And the short term is really important because we essentially need to restore confidence, both at home and abroad, that we still know what we're doing, that we really can, you know, have a plan that can work in the next couple of years. Because if we sit here in 5 years from today and we, you know, have the same kind of discussion, it may be too late. I mean, so I want to be very clear. So short term, I think it's very important that we work across the entire innovation cycle. Yes, Europe is really good at the early stages, R&D, we know that. That's not enough, right? It's really the scaling and commercialization of the innovation that matters. And here, let me tell you, this is not just startups that can't scale in Europe. This is also big companies, right? So Europe does extraordinarily poorly in producing sizable new companies. The last ones were SAP in 72 and ASML 86. If you want to be generous, you can add Spotify 2008, but is of course listed in the United States. So we do unbelievably poorly in producing new sizable companies. What does that mean? That means we need to pay attention to our existing companies very much, right? We know at the turn of the century, 41 of the world's most valuable companies in the world were European. We're now down to 14. Yeah, so this is, you can do the math, what this may mean if we don't get a plan in 10 or 15 years, yeah? So the other priority, lower costs. So much of what we have done to date has actually increased the cost of the energy transition. So now we need measures that lower. Energy is we have a high taxation on energy, makes no sense. We have negative auctions for offshore wind. We have the merit order. Everything that increases the cost needs to be looked at now so that we can bring down the cost. We need, you already said it, Mr. Liese, faster permitting. We need to understand that regulation is a cost. Every regulation carries a compliance cost. Someone needs to figure out, what are we doing here? How do we comply with this? It's a cost, yeah? So I'm not saying don't have a regulation, but do understand there is a cost. And if you have a tsunami of regulation, you will have a tsunami of cost and complexity, and it slows things down. Digitalization not used to maximum effect. There are many, many measures now that could lower the cost, and I would say this needs to be one of the top priorities. We also now need, again, to make really an effort to attract investment. We have fallen asleep attracting investment. I remember in the Juncker days with the Juncker plan, that was a big thing, you know, trying to attract investors to Europe. We have lost that somehow, and I actually think that Next Generation EU made us a little bit lazy in trying to understand we need to attract investment into Europe, and I say here especially from countries that are maybe not systemic competitors. And we also need to understand, I think sometimes we think that subsidies do the trick. No amount of subsidies will be appealing to an investor unless there is the prospect of a growing and thriving market on the other side, right? I mean, and if you cannot sell that, if you cannot convince anyone there is a growing market, no amount of subsidies will matter, right? So we need much more blended finance instruments. We have one with the Commission and the EIB that's called Catalyst that I think is excellent, should be replicated also for others. We need to look at the Juncker plan again that had a first loss guarantee. I think we need a Juncker plan on steroids, frankly. So we need to look at financial instruments that really crowd in the private sector. And let me say, the private sector is needed not only for the funds, but also for the expertise. I see it now that I work with investors. There's a lot of expertise there that, frankly, we don't have in Brussels. We need to tap into. They have global networks. They know things about these technologies, right, that we don't. So we need to take this seriously. I think that the bottom line is really we need to make, again, a business and an investment case for Europe. And we haven't done that in a long time. We haven't done that in a long time. And I tell you, sort of the Brussels effect, and we regulate everything, is not a good business and investment case, right? So we need to really think what makes us different, what's the value proposition, why should anyone do business in Europe? The last thing I'll say is we need to hold the public sector to account. The public sector is demanding all sorts of things from everyone, from consumers, from the private sector. But, you know, we're trying to push people into EVs before there's a charging infrastructure, right? I mean, we need a new infrastructure. Who's going to do that? The public sector has to be in the front row there. We're saying to industry, decarbonize, but we're not making sure we have enough abundant and affordable clean electricity. And the industry cannot decarbonize unless we have this, right? We need to look at public procurement. If only the government actually bought some of these technologies they say they would like to see stand up in Europe, you know, that could really be transformational. So what I want to see in the next 5 years is much better understanding what is the role of the public sector, how do we hold a public sector to account, and really clear targets for what they need to achieve and not always what everyone else needs to achieve. I will wrap up by saying, this is all in Europe. We need to look externally, right? Europe is a very small part of the global economy now, only around 15% of GDP. So what is our external strategy? And here we really need aligned trade, competition, and industrial policy. I think we've made terrible mistakes in the past by having a very open trade policies for subsidized products when we were overly strict on our own companies. didn't give them the state aid that maybe they needed to be technology leaders. We're paying that price now. This has to be done better. We need more alignment. The last thing I will say is the global that's a slip. The global gateway needs to really also see how do we help our own companies, our own products get into the market. What I'd like to point out here, European wind is on its knees, right? I mean, so we really need to also help now the European wind industry through the global gateway enter other markets, because European wind is produced to a high labor standard. Yeah, do we still care about this? To a high labor standard, is produced with blades that can be recycled, very high data privacy, cybersecurity standards. Do we still care about this stuff? And if we don't care about it, then why impose it on our own companies and not on others, especially if they want to do business in Europe? So these are my questions, is how do we find that right mix between sort of internal and external policies? And how do we put all of that together so that we're not only playing defense, but playing offense against for a change, that we have a compelling plan that drives business, that really makes a case why you should invest in Europe. This is what's needed now. And I completely agree with you, Dr. Liese, that we can't make a huge flip-flop now. The Green Deal is the right direction, but we now need a business and investment case. And I think if we get that, then that can really be transformational and is the way forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anne, for this top reports and a very, very precise diagnosis and also prescription for the future. Lídia, I'm happy to have you here, and congratulations for your re-election with this mandate. In your previous mandate, part of your work was related to the Green Deal, so be happy to hear how do you see things, and maybe give us some optimism or pessimism. Let's see.
Well, good afternoon to everyone, and first of all, let me thank you for the kind invitation to join you this afternoon, and also to have the opportunity to share the stage with my good friend Peter Liese and Anne Mettler. Today we're going to be together twice, I think. Yeah. So it is great, and thank you, Dimitri, for the initiative. Well, the Green Deal, I just wanted to say that I agree with the vast majority of what Anne just said, and probably with what Peter said before, because we usually are quite aligned. And what can I say about the Green Deal? One of the concerns I have at the moment is that, well, obviously there is I see the Green Deal as an opportunity, but we cannot create problems. And I've been working a lot with the Clean Tech Friendship Group in the Parliament. We cannot create problems to companies to have the ability to scale up. We have to be enablers. And what I feel in a number of occasions is that we have now the framework, but somehow the framework is creating resistance for that capacity to develop full potential to develop, okay? So this is something that I think we have to look with different eyes from the past, not forgetting that, and here to give you a political angle, the context has changed. We did something good, which was approving the climate law in the peak of the pandemic. So we delivered on that. Then the Fit for 55 package unfolded. We delivered on that. But now we are witnessing some issues that have to be corrected quicker, very fast, rather than late, because otherwise, all we have heard from the Draghi report in the recent weeks, which, by the way, are not different from what the EPP group has been saying in the parliament over the past 5 years, competitiveness has to be at the heart of the Green Deal opportunities and not creating obstacles for the future of this continent. To put it in very, very bluntly, I don't want Europe to be the museum of the world. I want Europe to be the hub of innovation, of scaling up. And so if the regulations are not delivering in that respect, then we have eventually to take not taking one step back, but do a reassessment. We need to understand if the millions and the billions of euros that are being poured in the European economy are creating a return. If not, maybe we have to redirect and rechannel those investments. There has to be this assessment. There really has. And I think we have been missing this. Another thing is that I would like to make this parallel comparison is that the EPP has been one of the strongest advocates for the social market economy, and with the Green Deal, we have somehow created the European sustainability model, which can work, but we can also we cannot put all the burden on ourselves. We have, and now it's a good opportunity because we are just in the approaching the COP29. We have to make the other geographies to come aboard to meet the climate goals. We are on track. We have done our job. We have proven to the world that it is possible to decarbonize our economy, to create opportunities in business, even though we have to make the necessary changes for our economies to be able to, for our companies to be able to flourish and to develop and to scale up. But we have also to convoke once and for all the other geographies in the world to meet the climate goals. We cannot expect that Europeans are going to sort out climate change by their own. We are not. And this does not put at stake anything that I have been said, and my commitment, my personal commitment, the commitment of the group, of the party towards 2050, towards climate neutrality, towards future generations, because this is at stake. It's the humankind. So we cannot keep, overburdening ourselves with regulation that does not work. We need a transversal approach. I've worked on the carbon removal certification framework, and it impacts so many other regulations, and the other regulations influence. It has to be clear for the users, for the market agents, to be able to participate in this voluntary market, which sooner or later will become a compliant market. But this has to be easy. This has to be. I give you one example just to conclude my remarks. Any transition, we know it is not the easiest, but there has to be a room for making it easier. What do I want to say? In COP27 or 26, I don't remember which, it was in Glasgow. 26.
26.
We thought about, going by train from here. Remember, Peter?
Yes.
And then we were checking. Well, it was mostly because of, first, a matter of convenience, because we would the flight to get to Glasgow would take the same amount of time as taking flights, as taking the train. And then because, climate-wise, would make sense. I mean, and we could work. It's it's not so stressful as we are in the airports every week. But anyway, we checked that, but the difference in cost was immense to take a flight or to take a train. So if I am, I went by train there, but I came back by plane on the way back. But if we want people to be, also agents of this transition, it has to be easy, convenient, and it cannot be triple the price. And this is connected to what Anne was referring to in terms of the energy costs. Taxation regimes are completely distorted for the renewable energy market. Completely. So we have to change it. And we know it is, when we talk about taxation, it is a national competence. But I mean, there has to be an alignment between countries, between the leaderships of the national governments, to try to enable the capacity of Europe, of companies, of households having access to cheap energy. It should be as simple as that. Because if we think that people are going to choose the train, in this case, over a plane all the time, I'm sorry, no, they are not. We didn't. So this was just an example to conclude, like, we have a lot of work to do. I really hope that this window of opportunity that the Draghi report opened, I think the President von der Leyen is quite sensitive to the fact that we have 5 years to deliver on that. We have to make our companies competitive, because otherwise we are going to just sit and watch and see the rest of the world moving forward, and obviously not neglecting the geopolitical circumstance that we are in. I mean, when Russia invaded Ukraine, we saw the impact on energy costs. I mean, if we were a little bit more independent from an energy point of view, and if we had a functional grid to promote the use of renewable energies, maybe we would have been in a much easier situation. And everything that we have been doing in terms of the digital energy transition would have been much smoother than what we are witnessing. So I think these are critical elements that we have to take into consideration, and I'm sure that we will push for in the Parliament in this new term that starts. Thank you.
Obrigada. Thank you. I'll follow up very briefly with follow-ups for all of the participants, and then we'll open up for the audience. I'm mindful that everybody has a busy day, so we'll try to finish on time, of course. Peter, you mentioned implementation in your opening remarks, and I'm curious, we're in the beginning of the mandate. How do you see next couple of years in the Parliament when it comes to regulation, when it comes to the agenda? Are we going to be a bit more smart, a bit more pragmatic, or the legislative factor is going to continue churning?
Yeah, we have to be more pragmatic. And there is a big issue. Even the Greens start to understand that we cannot add another Green Deal. So they were dreaming about even more legislation where they were not successful in the last parliament. But they are starting to understand that it's not possible to add more, because there was one moment in time when we as the EPP wanted to stop the nature restoration law. And I still think it was not for nothing, because it is there, but it is much more moderate than Timmermans' proposals. The Dutch media said Timmermans created a piranha. Now it's a goldfish without teeth. So that was good. We have to be careful in implementation that the piranha doesn't come back. But at that stage, I talked to a Green colleague, and I asked her, because she wanted me to support the nature restoration law. I asked her, do you have any idea how this nature restoration law interlinks with all the other legislation that we have on the table, which also affects the same industry, like packaging industry, paper industry? For example, what is your position on packaging and how does it fit together? And she said, I have no idea. This is another colleague that is taking care about packaging. So if the Green MEPs have no idea how things are interlinked, how can industry, how can farmers, forest owners understand what Europe is doing, and how can they help us to find the right way? I have always asked the forest owners, the farmers, the SMEs, if you spend 50% of the time that you invest about complaining about Europe, what we did wrong, 50% of this time to help us to do it right, to give us good advice so that we can achieve the target without harming your business case, then you have invested your time very good. But if we are not able to understand all the effects, then how can the SMEs understand it and help us to do it right? So that's why we need to slow down. We also need to be ready to revert some issues when we see it's not implementable or the cost. Very important point from Ann Mettler, regulation comes with a cost. Many people complain about the cost of ETS, but regulation has a much higher cost when we do it wrong. And that's why we need to think twice, and we need to be ready to revert the legislation if it's too costly or even impossible to implement. And that's why I'm so happy that we will see this first step on deforestation. And then comes the second problem. All this legislation will now have delegated acts, implementing acts. And again, I doubt that anyone on the globe, on the continent, can understand all the implications. So we need to be ready to think twice, also to postpone things when we are not sure that we really do it right. So I think that's the biggest challenge. We can destroy the European economy and the trust in the climate policy at the same time when we just go ahead and say this was decided and we don't look at the left or at the right, we just go straight the letter of the law. So for me it's very clear, we need to meet the target. But the way how we do it, we need to be very flexible and listen to those that have to implement.
Thank you. Anne, you mentioned clean tech in your opening, and I know that technological optimism permeates in your statements and your overall thinking. I wonder, where do you see the best comparative advantages when it comes to European technologies or innovative potential? You mentioned wind. What else is there from your perspective, and how can we actually encourage it?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. So I work basically on sort of a new generation of clean technologies. Before I speak about those, I do want to say something about wind, because we know we lost solar entirely, right? I mean, even though that was developed here, everyone needs to understand it's very, very expensive to develop a new technology. I mean, it's years of R&D, it's a lot of subsidies, investments, etc. In the case of wind, offshore wind really came out of Denmark in the early 1980s. This is a big investment that one makes, right? And it takes decades for these technologies to become cost competitive. And so when we make a big investment, this goes back to what I said earlier, we need to make sure that an integral part is the scaling and commercialization, because it's only the scaling that can help us bring down the cost, right? And so back in the day, once we did this with solar, so that is pretty much lost, I think is fair to say. We did it with wind. In wind, we're still playing, so this should really be considered a strategic industry. We know last year at COP, we said we would triple renewables in the world, right? And our own team, our negotiating team, pushed for this. I wonder, did anyone ever have in mind, how can such a global goal benefit our own industry? Because in wind, there aren't many players, and we are one of the top players. So we need to put two and two together. Our diplomats need to also think about if we engage such a goal, if we push for such a goal of tripling renewables globally, then how do we get our own wind industry positioned here? So this is the new way we need to do things. So that on wind. When it comes then to other technologies, we're pretty good at grid technology. We are leaders in cables. You know what they say about cables? It's the new pipeline. The top 3 global cable companies are European. So if I was strategic now, I would say, what do we need to do to make sure, A, these companies are not sold? How do we make sure these companies can grow? Because we know that the demand for cables will skyrocket. So be very strategic. I think one of the mistakes we made, we went all in on renewables, and that's fine, but it's an intermittent source. What about storage technologies? We actually have amazing storage companies in Europe, but until recently, no one paid attention. The Commission still has no strategy for storage technologies. How is this supposed to work? The power grid, only a priority very recently, right? So we need more systems thinking. What is this energy system we're trying to build? What are the technologies? How do we get it together? Right now, you go and you ask, you say, oh, there's someone who works on wind, and here's someone who works on grids, and here. We need systems thinking. And then on top of that, you also need security implications, right? Because all of that is hackable, you can exert sabotage, So the security establishment and the people working on security also need to become part and parcel of this thinking, right? the energy system is like the quintessential it's like the central nervous system of any economy. And I would argue that we went straight in, to really, as I said before, the biggest transformation we ever lived through without thinking, how does it all fit together? What are the technologies? What are the mature technologies? What are the nascent technologies that we need to invest in? How does it come together as a system? That is needed now, right? So in addition to that, I want to say that the opportunity after 2022 was how do we quickly get off natural gas? I built a whole initiative around this with Siemens Energy called the Energy Resilience Leadership Group, where we said, how do we reduce demand for natural gas in buildings, industry, and in the power sector? And then we looked at what are the young technologies, the emerging clean technologies that can now quickly be scaled. They were ready to scale, right? How do we invest in them? What are the regulatory bottlenecks? And we found a number of wonderful technologies, including clean electrical heat. You can today get the kind of heat you get from fossil energy with electricity. This is what we needed to invest in after 2022. Barely anyone paid attention. No one paid attention. Missed opportunity. It would have been good for climate, it would have been good for competitiveness, it would have been good for our security and resilience. We need to be more strategic, is my point, yes? And there are wonderful opportunities, and I see it every day because we invest in companies in Europe. They're great startups, but they don't scale. And this is why it's so important we bring them together with existing industry players, because you have, on the one hand, you have the innovation and the industry players have the scale. And it's really that mixture that is sort of the secret sauce to innovation in energy, because I think a lot of our thinking in energy is actually predicated on how it happens in digital, where things can go viral and, a young company can replace an incumbent. That's highly unlikely in energy, highly unlikely. And this is why my proposal for the new industrial policy is look at the intersection between startups, universities, and industry, and see how can we bring the innovation together with the scale that this industry has. This has never been done. We've done it in the Energy Resilience Leadership Group. I can tell you in 2 years, we've seen investments into the tens of millions by now into these technologies, but only because we took the time to bring the right actors together, the big industries, the startups, the policymakers, the EIB, and really brought everyone together and say, how do we do this now? And I think we need that kind of hands-on approach in a new EU industrial policy. And that'll be a very different approach, but please use it as a case study, because what I can say is it does work. And Lídia, you've been part of some of these deliberations.
You have a direct follow-up, I guess, or
I just wanted to make an additional comment to what Anne just said. I think there's also a huge challenge for this new commission whenever they start, which is to push, and I mentioned this earlier, to push the national governments to actually understand that this strategy that Anne is referring to is really necessary for the affirmation of Europe as a whole in the global sphere. Because the problem here that I think it exists and also leads me to a topic that I think is of strong relevance, capital markets union, for the scalability of companies. I think it is key, and I would like that by the end of this term, it's a reality. But we need this national leadership in conjunction with these European objectives, because what we are talking here about is security, energy security and independence, is about technology, is about not being sitting in the second row, but we are sitting in the front row in terms of leadership in the global context. So how, and this is the challenge, to reconcile the national interests with European objectives. This is something I think it is key to the new Commission, to the leadership, to Ursula von der Leyen herself, because this will be, this is a defining moment, and otherwise, I guess, I'm not saying that we can just give up, because we don't give up, but we see that both the US and China and even the BRICS are becoming stronger and stronger, and we are, constantly being lagging behind. And another element is that we really need economic growth. How are we supposed to pay for the demographic challenges that we have ahead of us? We are one of the most aged continents in the world. We need economic growth to deliver to meet the needs of all generations, not only of the older, but all generations. So I think this is key. Reconcile national interest with the European objectives will be defining for the future.
Thank you. I think we've had excellent content so far. So I'm opening up. First question here. Let's take 3 questions. Lady, Ivan, and the gentleman there. We'll have a second round. So lady I'm not sure of the color. Not purple, not pink. I'm a bit colorblind, but please.
No worries. It's Francesca Stevens, Secretary General of European, the European Organization for Packaging and the Environment. We've been kind of prominent a little bit in the course of last year, in particular with our packaging and packaging waste regulation. Appreciate very much the directness and openness of the debate. I just, first of all, if I'm allowed, just to make a point, just perhaps I wouldn't like to communicate or give the impression that this is just a last 5 years problem. So industry has been singled out as the one that doesn't want to change, transform for the last 20 years. I've personally been in meetings with the senior official of the European Commission back in 2009, Copenhagen COP, where we're told, at the time I was in the aluminium industry, we don't need these industries anymore. You're old industries. You're the past. Okay, this was the tone. If we go back even to 2004, electricity market liberalization, where we heard that we needed to open up the market. And so smelters were forced to purchase electricity like families, renegotiating their contract on a yearly basis. That's still the case today. So my question is on energy, to start with, how are we going to deal with this problem of electricity cost? Because, ultimately, is the ETS really the problem? Is CBAM going to solve something? No, it's going to solve anything. We need to bring down electricity costs. I haven't heard nuclear today. I hear not about renewables, but we are joking ourselves if we think that we can achieve, bring down electricity costs without nuclears. I'm not talking about building new power plants necessarily, because everybody says it takes too long and it's too costly, but we are shutting down perfectly functioning power plants, as we know from Germany and nearly Belgium as well. Then my question is on single market as well, my second one, because we hear a lot of talks. We've been very involved also with the letter report. It's all great, capital market unions. Yes, these are all things we need. But the single market for goods is falling apart as we speak, and industry is not heard. I can give you the list of formal complaint, 3 submissions that we have made. There is no political leadership. The European Commission is not acting as the guardian of the treaty. We found no support in the European Parliament, not in any committee, including the INCO committee, in defending the single market for goods. So that's why industry are not investing in Europe. And to the point you were making on about BASF, 2 years ago they announced we no longer invest in Europe, the biggest chemical company in the world, and nobody moved a finger. Nobody reacted to that statement. So I can go on and on, but on single market I like to hear, does anyone perceive how bad is the situation for the one that was functioning, for the one that we nearly completed, the single market for goods? And is anything happening on electricity? Because, just telling us, we need grids, we need all of these things, but we need to, if we want to keep our basic industries, which are the base of everything, all the supply chains, we need a solution for electricity costs.
Thank you. Front row, Ivan.
Thanks, Dimitar. Ivan Delibosic, Hydrogen Europe. But I also spent more than 10 years in the EPP family between the party, the group, and the Martin Center. Maybe to start with answering the question that was left hanging, and that is, which are the technologies where we lead? Well, Draghi's report actually clearly indicates that we have, in that order, leadership in wind, hydrogen, heat pumps, and then geothermal. And that there are certain technologies such as solar and batteries which are gone from this continent without a lot of chance to revive them. So I thought that it was useful to have as an answer to your question. Quick question to Dr. Liese. Actually, there are two. One is going to be very short. I think that the industry is fully aligned with what you said. We need to keep on with the Green Deal. We can't change the targets. There is a clear market indication of what we need to do. What might be good, instead of kind of looking into the changes, is introducing flexibility. Where we see that things are going wrong, instead of saying, okay, whatever has been done in the past 5 years, we scrap it. Instead of doing that, maybe we just give opportunities to more pathways to do that. And the small question is, based on what you said, does it mean that ETS for agriculture is dead? And maybe as a former YEPer, I tend to be on a more conservative side of the fiscal policy, Lídia. How do you see, based on your work in the previous mandate and moving into the next one, this announcement of the European Competitiveness Fund? What should that do? And how that should function. We don't have too many details, but we all have our opinions of what might work and what might not.
Thank you. Excellent questions. And there was a gentleman over there. Yep.
Thank you very much, Jakub Groszkowski, PGE. I really liked what Ann Mettler has said about European Green Deal as a growth strategy, as understood, written in DG Klima. And people at DG Grow and DG ECFIN were not jobless at that time, please remember. They were writing pieces like CSRD or CSDD, and of course, they also take an important part in taxonomy and sustainable finance framework as such. I'm referring to reporting mostly. Enormous amount of reporting that not only our company and energy sector has to do, but all the industry. And I've been to a meeting yesterday, and people from the paper industry were complaining on it as much as we do. The Commission does not seem to be ready to accept all of this reporting and make any use for the households and for the companies. So do you see any possibilities to make these reporting standards more rational, or essentially decrease the amount of reporting that is frequently repeating itself? Thank you.
Okay, so to wrap up, question about electricity costs, single market for goods, flexibility on legislation, ETS for agriculture, competitiveness fund, the newly announced, and reporting. Maybe let's start with Anne, followed by Lídia, and we'll finish with Dr. Liese. Anne?
On the first one, completely agree that this is not a new phenomenon. I told you I've been working on this for 20 years, but the deindustrialization has markedly accelerated after 2022, I think is fair to say, and it's linked to the cost of energy. Yeah, so that's very clear. So that's why your question on how to reduce the cost of electricity is very pertinent. And nuclear, of course, is a key part. I mean, the damage that I'm sorry, I don't know how you feel about it, Dr. Liese, but the damage that this has done internationally, that Germany in a crisis like this shut off a perfectly well-functioning nuclear power plants, is enormous. I mean, is enormous. Just to be clear about this. But I think it can be brought down. I mean, I mentioned some measures that can be taken, including looking at, I mean, the very high taxation that we have, so I mean, I think that can be worked out, and I'm very grateful to Mario Draghi that he highlighted that this is really a challenge. You know, how do we expect our industry to be competitive when they pay more than 300% higher cost for natural gas than American competitors? I mean, it's just not possible, right? I mean, so at least now it's been brought to the attention, and I do hope that something can happen about it. On the second one, on the technologies, I'm glad you mentioned hydrogen and heat pumps. So I agree, Europe has advantages here. However, on hydrogen, I mean, it's a fact that very few projects have gotten to final investment decision. I think it's somewhere in the range of 4 or 5%. So we need to be really clear that making an announcement or having a conference on hydrogen doesn't mean you're creating a hydrogen market, yeah? We need to be very clear that there is no confusion about this, because I've said on many panels where people say we're a global leader in hydrogen, and I'm like, wait a second, you know, you really believe this? So, you know, this is why actually the European Court of Auditors, the reality check was very helpful, right? Because, I mean, this was to the extent that there was sort of a holy grail towards decarbonization. For us, it was especially green hydrogen. We are not making enough progress. We have not built these markets. There is close to no demand for hydrogen right now. So, I'm saying, yes, we have good R&D. We also have good companies. We've invested in them. But, this is not enough. And that's why I'm saying creating the ecosystem where these companies can flourish is so important. You mentioned wind. Wind is on its knees. I already spoke about it. You mentioned heat pumps. Heat pumps are on their knees. Heat pump industry is on their knees. So, if we think we're leaders in something, but our industry is on its knees, we're doing something wrong. And someone's got to pay attention to it, right? So whatever we are doing is not working, so do something different, right? And this is where I just expect us to dig a little bit deeper, to actually have interest in what industries and startups are telling us, and try to understand what the issues are. I spoke about the Energy Resilience Leadership Group. This is what we do there. We try to understand, what is the bottleneck? Why can't you scale? We need this technology. What is the bottleneck? And then you will see it's a combination of regulation, permitting, funding, access to big corporations. And this is a very different approach than just doing a top-down regulation or a 2050 target, right? This is when you really need to go deep and understand what is the bottleneck here. And this is what I expect now, is really much more thorough policy planning that looks at why is this not working, right? We have all this ambition, we have these targets, and it's not working. So this is my expectation. On the last one, on reporting. So it was extremely interesting for me that just as the EU discovered that it needs to restore its competitiveness, at the very last minute, we pushed through the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which is, of course, if you ever wanted to shoot the biggest own goal, we did it, right? So I think no one has any idea what's coming our way in terms of lawsuits, in terms of compliance costs, and how this, let's suffice it to say, this was so not credible. And, that this is something that I think we ought to look at again. And if we do it, and I tell you, this is political malpractice to only ever impose all of this on our own companies while keeping markets wide open to companies that don't have to comply to all the stuff that our companies have to. And Europe is, in my experience, the only geography that systematically treats its own companies worse than their international competitors. Why are we doing that? It's not a smart strategy.
Lídia, EU Competitiveness Fund, thoughts or any other questions?
Yeah, no, I just want to make a brief remark on the electricity cost, because it's connected to what I said about the national interest and the European objectives. In this sense, we need an energy union. That's pretty clear for everyone. We cannot have, or we cannot keep having bilateral agreements on energy between countries as opposed to actually actively work for this energy union. I give you an example. The agreement that was fostered between France, Spain, and Portugal. It's a bilateral agreement, but it does not envisage entirely the view of an energy union. And why? Because, well, being Portuguese, I will bring this up again. The energy interconnectors that are still somehow stopped in the Pyrenees because, well, guess what? France, well, they're quite good on the nuclear energy. And Emmanuel Macron even announced that he wanted to build another 13 power plants of nuclear energy. I have my thoughts about nuclear energy for Portugal in particular. It doesn't seem to be, very interesting, but because there's alternative ways to have cheap energy, which are the renewables, which is wind power, which is solar power, but we are not connected. And so, sorry?
It's not base load power, so it doesn't, you don't have it constantly. So it doesn't
Go to Portugal and look at it.
No, I don't. I don't think it's exactly like that. It is a national. It is a national. It's the determination of the French government not to build the interconnectors. It's quite clear. Everyone knows it because there is national interest to, sell the energy that is produced by the nuclear power plants in France. Simple as that. And this undermines our capacity to have access to cheaper energy union. Okay, this is one of the elements. I just wanted to bring this up because I believe it is relevant, and it's also the connection between the national and European objectives. European Competitiveness Fund. I'm going to say something that might sound as like a bit of wishful thinking, but I do believe that when it comes to creating funds, we have to make some sort of intergenerational impact assessment to understand what are we chipping in money for and what is the impact across generations. We had unmentioned Next Generation EU, but I don't think we had the necessary debate on like who's going to pay this, what is if we are going to meet the objectives and so on. Like it's always pushed for the next generations, and I think we need to be a bit more sensible. Everything we have been talking about, public policies are of these ones in particular have a huge impact on the long term. So these, when it comes to financing as well, I believe we need to be a bit more cautious for the reasons I presented earlier. Reporting standards, yes, there is ways of reducing the burden, but I mentioned in my first intervention about the political context. I do know that this didn't start in the last 5 years, but the political context of the past 5 years was quite responsible for the current state of play when it comes to reporting standards. And so I think I'm saying this because we really have to be conscious of that, that we have been, EPP has been super outspoken in every circumstance in negotiating the legislation, texts and so on. But the political context resulted in this way. So I do believe that we have now a bit more space to make things right, and not in the right ideological sense of the word, but make things right for the future, I hope.
Lídia, Mettler, thoughts on these questions?
Yeah, maybe first a disclaimer. I mentioned some very clear position, and I stand to them, but not everything what I say is already EPP position. So when I speak about the 25 target for the cars, we are still discussing about the best way forward. On your question, I disagree that the problem exists since 20 years. The problem has been very strongly Timmermans and the way he worked and the way the political mood, the political majority in the parliament was. Before, there has been a lot of industry failures, a lot of industry mistakes. When I spoke to the cement industry in my constituency in 2019, people told me, we will never be climate neutral. Never. Forget about Mr. Liese, 2050, impossible. Now we have the Innovation Fund. I have a plant in my constituency. They have plans for being climate neutral in 2030. Industry was not active enough, not progressive enough. And that turned to, delay. We would have been in a much better situation when we have started earlier. But then, if you start late with a marathon, it's not good to do a sprint, because then you will never come to the goal. So the pace can't be too fast, and it has been too fast in the last 5 years. And I want to emphasize this much more. I speak especially about German industry. German industry convinced Angela Merkel and others that Russian gas is safe. And the main cause of the economic crisis that we are in Germany now is because we believed in it. Would we have been more independent, started with the renewables 20 years ago, we would be in a much better situation. So that's also part of the truth. It is true what I said, that the Greens and Timmermans exaggerated and there was no dialogue with industry, but it's also true that industry was wrong before the war broke out. So that's also important. On the costs, I fully agree that it was a big mistake by Germany to phase out nuclear. And there is not only this actual economic impact, but the trust that we really take it serious has been lost. And now I supported that decision in 2000 and when was it? 2008. I had my doubts, but was loyal to my party leader. Now I regret also this. But definitely, when the war broke out, everybody should have realized, no, we need to completely change our attitude. And Europe needs nuclear energy. I don't encourage any member state to follow Germany. But also it's the truth that in particular in some regions, and now Portugal has so much solar and wind, and you have more clever solutions on demand management and on storage, more clever than wait 30 years until the nuclear power plant goes into office. We need to act much more fast. We need to reduce the costs, and a European issue is there are people that say the ETS2 is a horrible thing because it will increase the cost of energy. The same people, the Greens, the Socialists, say ETS1 can't be ambitious enough. We need to be more ambitious. Industry is able to pay this. ETS1 is also increasing the price of electricity. And the price of electricity is a major obstacle of the transition and the major obstacle to be independent from gas from difficult countries. I know people that sold their electric vehicle in 22 when they saw their electricity bill. So, and I know companies that invested in transition and then they saw their electricity bill. So the price of electricity must go down and we need to do whatever we can. Maybe I just mentioned the ETS2. I was very much encouraged. You know that Friedrich Merz is now the candidate for the chancellorship in Europe. We are twice as strong as the Social Democrats for the moment in the polls, and also much stronger than the far right. Don't be confused by some results in Eastern Germany. We are well above 30%, so he most likely will be the next chancellor. And I spoke to him on Monday night. He clearly said we need to keep the ETS and we need to implement the ETS2 because that is the main tool. It comes with a cost, but all the alternatives come with much higher cost. But he was also so outspoken on CSRD and all the rest. We need very soon a dramatic cut of the paperwork here. It is a nightmare what, and Lídia said it, it was imposed to us. It was not EPP position. So we need to turn around and keep it on the focus. You know, RWE is a big German electricity company. They have a problem with CO2. They have a plan to decarbonize. They have laid it down on 200 pages, how they want to decarbonize. And then the auditors came and said, you need 3 times more pages. You know, if you have a plan to decarbonize, you can put it on 1 page, and then you do it. But not 500 or 700 pages will do the job. So, yeah, I'm asked to be short, so very short. Flexibility, I think I said everything, not flexible on the target, but on the way to do it. ETS agriculture, not completely dead, but I think we need to be really careful. We need to start with encouraging farmers, helping them, and not punishing them. And for the moment, any idea is perceived as a punishment. So let's intensify the dialogue, and I think we have better ideas. And last but not least, third countries. You know, we have a horrible amount of problems, but we have also a small success story, and that is CBAM. Some are surprised, but Lídia and me, we met Singapore in Dubai at the COP, and they said, we have an ETS, and we want to go along with Europe. We want the same. But the European Commission was not ready to talk to us. So we pushed the Commission. Now they have 10 people, a task force that all day, all night, talk to third countries. And that's what we need to do. Not think we can save the world alone, but create alliances, push other economies, protect our industry. And this is more successful than many people know. The Commission is flooded with requests. How can we avoid CBAM? By doing climate policy at home. And that's what we want.
Okay, excellent. We have a quick round of questions, please. Gentleman over there, lady over there had a question as well. Do we have a third final question from somebody? Okay, 2 questions for now. And the gentleman there as well, 3.
Hi, Brian Chesler from IDDANA. Actually, for Dr. Liese specifically, I just saw that the Commission has postponed the EUDR for about 1 year, so thank you for the, thank you. Do you think that this postponement, and I guess this kind of goes in general, but do you think that this postponement would, you'd be able to use this to make that law a little bit more workable, make the implementation of that more workable, or, and I said this for all of the Green Deal legislation that's coming, and this is supposed to be the year, this is going to be the mandate for implementation, so is there going to be a way to take what happened in the last mandate and make it more workable for businesses, for industry? Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Lady over there.
Hello, so my name is Anna Katerina. I work for the EPC as an energy policy analyst. So very good questions were raised regarding the reporting. I was actually going to ask the same question, but also if there's any plans on changing a little the dynamics in the DGs, because as you said, there's a lack of conversations between DG Energy, DG Connect, DG Agriculture. So we see all these transversal projects and these double, triple legislation, and I know it because I did 1,200 pages reporting, and it takes a long, long time. The resources that are put into it puts me into question. I worked for multinational, so we had the budget to do it, and even then we got affected. But then at the same time, I think if the SMRs, which are under these regulations from the CBAM to the CCRD, the CC3D, and all of these applications, how are they going to pay for that and be able to report on everything? So if you have any insights on it, please.
Thank you. And final question. Gentleman mid-row, who is there? Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. So I actually heard that Mr. Liese mentioned about Singapore. So which drove my thinking about, for example, how the Singaporean strengths or competitiveness might boost the European Union competitiveness through more innovative methods for the future collaboration. For example, if you think about the innovation ecosystem of the EU, there are certain bottlenecks regarding the capital shortage, especially from the private sectors. Especially if you think about the startup funding is okay in the EU, but the scaling up funding is a important, essential bottleneck right now that push the EU startups to move out to other parts of the world. So basically, what I mean is that, how do you think about, is it a way to introduce the Singaporean, especially Singaporean capital, into the innovation ecosystem in the European Union?
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. I would kindly ask for 1 minute each to pick up on the questions or maybe final remarks. So let's go, Dr. Liese.
So then in 1 minute, I'm not an expert on Singaporean capital. Let's talk over a coffee afterwards. I think EUDR is the message of today. I'm happy that now it's official. I worked a lot for the postponement because we were running into a nightmare. No. And that is a problem in many, many European legislation. You expect SMEs, you expect forest owners, farmers to comply when the infrastructure is not ready. So there is no data bank where you can see what you can do to convince people, to prove that you are not cutting trees for producing meat or whatever. And still, in December, you are asked to comply. So first, the infrastructure must be there. Then there must be also a clear interpretation. There are rumors out that are just not true. But people think they need to report every piece of wood in every product. It's not necessary, and the Commission needs to clarify this. So it's better to take some time, take a deep breath, also talk to third countries. You know, Lula government wants to stop deforestation, but they say this is not possible as the European Union has proposed, and we are punished for Bolsonaro. So let's also keep the allies. We need the allies for the international climate agenda. So today is a good day. I hope the Commission will come with a data bank soon with very unbureaucratic implementation guidelines. And then in 1 year, everybody, hopefully, not everybody, but 90% of people will say, okay, now it's okay. But let's not push things through when the conditions are not right. And that's why it's a good day today.
Thank you. Anne?
I think what I hear from a lot of the questions is it's time to look into sort of the engine room of EU policy making. And what I mean specifically is to go into policy planning. And what we can no longer have is sort of regulation by default, because I have the feeling that sometimes regulation is almost like occupational therapy in this town, including, frankly, not you two, but also for the parliament. And I think we need a new approach. We need to reverse engineer. What do we want to achieve? And then say, okay, this is how we might get there. Regulation may be part of it, but it's unlikely to be all of it, right? And here, let me tell you, I think there are huge opportunities for advances in policy planning. We can and we must do this better. The second thing I say, strategic foresight. Taking China as an example. China said we can't be competitive in the combustion engine, so what do? Oh, maybe an electric vehicle. What does an electric vehicle need? It needs a battery. What does a battery need? Critical minerals. Oh, so we create a value chain for critical minerals. This takes a long time. It takes a lot of endurance, but it does work. And I think it's now time for Europe to not only ever respond to what is happening, play defense, but really, where do we want to play offense? And this is the task of this political term. We need to play offense again. We need to be successful again. We need to score goals again. And this is not optional this time around. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my final remark, maybe answering more the question that was brought up on the DGs. I believe that the other challenge for the Commission this term is actually horizontal approach over the policy. So the DGs really have to talk to one another. What Peter mentioned about one colleague of ours not knowing that there was an impact from other legislation, I mean, that also cannot happen at the Commission level. So that would be my main comment on that. And to conclude, what Anne said remind me of a story. When we visit the US, we often have their observations on, oh, you guys, Europeans, you're doing a climate law. That's amazing. It's really like, you're such a role model. You're like, you're the exporters of legislation. This is the excitement of the US when they think of us. So I think we need to change a bit the mindset. So when we arrive in the US, you guys are innovators. You guys are scaling up. That would be that's what I would like to listen to, and not to be teased by our American friends that we are great exporters of legislation. Thank you.
A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for our great speakers. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. Have a lovely day ahead. Thanks.
Ja, allerdings.